I heard my daughter's words like a slap across my face. She's just a burden. Dead weight. The night air seemed to freeze around me as I stood in the hallway outside her kitchen. I'd only gotten up for a glass of water, padding quietly in my slippers so I wouldn't disturb anyone. My daughter Carol thought I was asleep in the guest room where I'd been staying for the past 3 months since Charles died. "Mom's completely lost without Dad," she continued to whoever was on the other end of the phone. "It's like she's forgotten how to live without him telling her what to do." I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding. Was that how she saw me? As some helpless, pathetic old woman? The mother who had once bandaged her scraped knees, stayed up all night with her fevers, and worked 2 jobs to put her through college? I know. Carol sighed into the phone. But my business is at a critical point right now. I can't be babysitting her while trying to land the Henderson account. I didn't stay to hear more. I crept back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. The bed in my daughter's house. The house I'd helped her buy with money from my retirement fund when she was just starting out. Dead weight. The words echoed in my mind as I looked around the room. My few possessions seemed to stare back accusingly. How had I become this person? I'd been married to Charles for 45 years. When the cancer took him, it felt like someone had ripped away half of myself. But had I truly been just an extension of him all those years? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I quietly packed my suitcase, gathering the remnants of a life that suddenly seemed smaller than I'd realized. Photos of Charles and me. The pearl earrings he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. Carol's childhood drawings I'd kept all these years. As the first hints of dawn appeared, I made one last cup of tea in the kitchen. My wedding ring caught the early light as I stirred in a spoonful of honey. I'd lost weight since Charles died, and the ring slipped easily from my finger. I placed it in the small porcelain teacup on the counter, the same one Carol had used as a child when she played family with her dolls. How proud she'd been, pouring imaginary tea for her babies while telling them stories about the wonderful adventures they would have together. What had happened to that little girl who once looked at me with such adoration? I left a short note beside the teacup. "I won't be a burden anymore. I love you, Mom." The front door closed behind me with barely a sound. I didn't look back as I wheeled my suitcase down the quiet street. I had $4,300 in savings, my Social Security, and a lifetime of skills that Charles had never given me credit for. I'd been a librarian before the children came, then a bookkeeper for a small local business while raising Carol and her brother Michael. Charles had always dismissed these as little jobs compared to his position as bank manager. I hadn't known where I was going that morning, just that I needed to find myself again. The woman I was before becoming Mrs. Charles Harrington, before becoming simply Carol's mom. I took a bus to the coast, remembering how I'd always wanted to live near the ocean, but Charles had insisted we stay in the suburbs. By noon, I found myself in Seabrook, a small coastal town with a main street of weathered shops and salt-tinged air. I sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats rock gently in the water. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find an elderly man with kind eyes smiling at me. "First time in Seabrook?" "Yes," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "I'm starting over." He nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Best place for it. I'm Harold, by the way. Own the bookshop down the street." "Sadie," I said, offering my name to a stranger for what felt like the first time in forever. "I used to be a librarian. A long time ago." Harold's eyes brightened. "Is that so? Well, Sadie, this might be fate. I've been looking for someone to help run the shop. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and the computer system might as well be written in hieroglyphics for all I understand it." I found myself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since Charles died. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a purpose," Harold replied. "And there's a room above the shop if you need a place to stay. Nothing fancy, but it's clean, and the view of the harbor is worth every penny of the rent." I should have been cautious. I should have worried about trusting a stranger. But something about Seabrook, about Harold, about the possibility of reinvention, made me feel more alive than I had in years. "When can I start?" I asked. Later that evening, as I unpacked my meager belongings in the small apartment above Harbor Lights Books, My phone buzzed with Carol's name on the screen. It was the third time she'd called since discovering my absence. I silenced it again, not ready for her anger, or worse, her pity. What I didn't know was that my daughter was staring at the wedding ring in the teacup, a strange mixture of relief and panic washing over her. The mother she'd taken for granted was gone, and for the first time, Carol was beginning to understand exactly what dead weight really meant. And in the coming months, she would learn it in ways neither of us could have imagined. The first week at Harbor Lights Books felt like stepping into someone else's life. Harold was patient as I learned the inventory system and met the regular customers. By the second week, I'd reorganized the children's section and started a reading corner with cushions I sewed myself from fabric remnants bought at the local craft shop. "You've got the magic touch," Harold said one afternoon as we watched a young mother reading to her toddler in the new corner. "Haven't seen this many children in here since, well, ever." I smiled, feeling a warm glow of pride that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or mother. This was all me, Sadie, the bookseller. My phone continued to buzz with messages and calls from Carol, but I only responded with brief texts. "I'm safe. I need time. Please respect that." After 2 weeks, she stopped calling. Michael, my son who lived in Seattle with his family, was more understanding. He called once to make sure I was okay, then respected my wish for space. "You've earned the right to reinvent yourself, Mom," he said. "Just promise you'll come see the grandkids when you're ready." As September rolled into October, I settled into a rhythm in Seabrook. Mornings in the bookshop, afternoons exploring the town or helping Harold with the accounting, evenings watching the sunset from my small balcony. I even started a children's reading hour on Saturday mornings that became surprisingly popular. One rainy Tuesday, I was shelving new arrivals when the bell above the door jingled. A woman about Carol's age walked in, shaking water from her umbrella. "Hi," she said, approaching the counter. "I'm Diana, the elementary school principal. Harold mentioned you used to be a librarian?" 2 hours later, I left the school with a volunteer position teaching reading to struggling students 3 afternoons a week. As I walked back to the bookshop under clearing skies, I realized I hadn't thought about Charles or Carol all day. The ache was still there, but it had become a dull throb rather than the sharp stab of fresh grief. "You're blooming," Harold commented one evening as we closed the shop together. "Like one of those desert flowers that only needs a little water to come back to life." I laughed, but I knew he was right. I was finding pieces of myself I thought had been lost forever. Or worse, pieces I never knew existed because I'd been so busy being what everyone else needed. Then came the night that changed everything. I was reading in bed when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Something made me answer. "Mrs. Harrington?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," I replied, the name feeling strange on my tongue after months of introducing myself simply as Sadie. "This is Elaine Winters, Carol's business partner. I'm not sure if I should be calling you, but I'm worried about Carol. She's in trouble." My heart clenched. "What kind of trouble?" "The business is failing. We lost the Henderson account because Carol missed crucial meetings. She's been different since you left. Distracted, making mistakes. And there are rumors that her husband Mark is seeing someone else." I closed my eyes, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Concern for my daughter, but also a flicker of vindication I wasn't proud of. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "But Carol made it clear I'm not welcome in her life right now." Elaine hesitated. "She didn't make it clear. She's too proud to admit she needs help. But Mrs. Harrington, she's drowning." After I hung up, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, watching the moonlight ripple across the harbor. Was I being cold-hearted? Or was this a necessary lesson Carol needed to learn? The next morning, I found Harold in the stockroom, surrounded by boxes of new arrivals. "I need a few days off," I said. "Family emergency." Harold nodded, no questions asked. "The shop will survive. Do what you need to do." The bus ride back to the suburbs felt like traveling backward in time. As the coastline disappeared and familiar landmarks emerged, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller. Was I making a mistake? Would Carol see my return as weakness, as proof that I couldn't make it on my own? But when I arrived at Carol's house, the house that had never felt like home to me, I knew something was wrong. The garden was overgrown and newspapers piled up on the porch. I rang the doorbell 3 times before I heard movement inside. The woman who opened the door barely resembled my daughter. Carol's usually immaculate hair hung limp around her pale face. Dark circles underlined bloodshot eyes. "Mom?" she whispered, as if seeing a ghost. "Can I come in?" I asked gently. The house was in disarray. Dishes piled in the sink, clothes scattered across furniture, dust gathering in corners. This from my perfectionist daughter who used to alphabetize her spice rack. "Mark moved out last month," Carol said as we sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd left my wedding ring. "He said he needed space to figure things out, but really he's living with his assistant. 24 years old, can you believe it?" I listened as the story unfolded. After I left, Carol had thrown herself into work, trying to land the Henderson account that would take her marketing firm to the next level. But without someone running interference at home, me, her marriage had started showing cracks. Mark felt neglected, Carol felt unsupported, and the arguments escalated until he packed a bag one night and didn't come back. Then I missed the Henderson presentation because I was up all night fighting with Mark on the phone, she continued. Elaine tried to cover for me, but it was a disaster. We lost the account and 3 other clients followed. The business is barely hanging on. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, seeing my daughter in pain still hurt me deeply. Carol looked up, tears streaming down her face. "No, I'm sorry. I called you a burden, but you were holding everything together. The truth is, I was the dead weight, too selfish to see what was right in front of me." I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt small and fragile, like when she was a child coming to me with a scraped knee or broken toy. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Mark's threatening to sue for his share of the business. I might lose everything." Part of me wanted to offer solutions, to move back in and fix everything. But I remembered the woman I'd discovered in Seabrook. Sadie the bookseller, Sadie the reading teacher, Sadie who watched sunsets alone and found joy in it. "You won't lose everything," I said firmly. "You still have yourself." Carol looked at me with confusion. "What do you mean?" "When your father died and I moved in with you, I thought I'd lost everything. My identity was wrapped up in being Charles's wife for so long that I didn't know who I was without him. But then I heard what you said that night, and as much as it hurt, it forced me to find out." Carol flinched. "Mom, let me finish," I said gently. "What I found was that I'm stronger than I knew, that there are parts of me that had been dormant for decades, waiting for sunlight. You need to find that in yourself now." "But you left," Carol whispered. "You didn't even say goodbye." I thought about the wedding ring in the teacup. Sometimes leaving is the only way to find your way back to yourself. As darkness fell outside, we talked more openly than we had in years. I told her about Seabrook, about Harold and the bookshop, about the children I taught to read. She listened with growing interest, a spark rekindling in her eyes. "You sound happy," she said, sounding almost surprised. "I am," I replied, "but that doesn't mean I stopped loving you." What I didn't tell her was the rest of my conversation with Elaine Winters, about the financial irregularities she'd discovered in the company accounts, or about the certified letter I'd found among the unopened mail on Carol's hall table, a notice from the bank about foreclosure proceedings. My daughter's world wasn't just cracking, it was about to shatter completely. And the question eating at me as I helped her clean the kitchen was whether I should catch her when it did, or let her learn to save herself, as I had. What Carol didn't know was that her soon-to-be ex-husband wasn't just having an affair. He had plans that would destroy what little remained of her life, and those plans had already been set in motion. I stayed with Carol for 3 days, helping her clean the house and sort through neglected mail. Each envelope we opened revealed another piece of the disaster her life had become: overdue bills, collection notices, and increasingly urgent communications from the company's accountant. On the 2nd day, while Carol was showering, her phone rang on the kitchen counter. The screen showed Elaine calling. I answered. "Carol, thank God. We need to talk about Mark." It's Sadie, Carol's mother, I interrupted quietly. Carol's upstairs. Elaine paused. You're there? Good. Look, I didn't want to overwhelm Carol when I called you, but things are worse than she knows. I've been going through the company books, and I found transactions, large ones, that I can't explain. Money's been leaving our business accounts for months. My stomach tightened. How much money? Almost $200,000. And the transfers started right around the time Mark began his affair. I closed my eyes, the pieces clicking into place. You think Mark was stealing from the company? I think Mark was stealing from Carol, Elaine said grimly. The transfers went to a shell company that I've traced back to him and his girlfriend. They were planning this for months. When Carol came downstairs, wrapped in an old bathrobe with her hair in a towel, I knew I had to tell her. The look on my face must have given me away. What is it? She asked, freezing at the bottom of the stairs. I led her to the kitchen table and gently explained what Elaine had discovered. Carol listened silently, her face growing paler with each word. $200,000, she finally whispered. That's all our operating capital. The business is finished. Not necessarily, I said, a plan already forming in my mind. But first, we need to understand exactly what Mark did and gather evidence. Carol looked at me with surprise. You want to fight him? Don't you? She shook her head slowly. I don't know if I have any fight left in me, Mom. Maybe this is karma. For how I treated you. For putting work before everything else. Stop, I said firmly. This isn't karma. This is theft. And you're not going to let him take everything you've worked for. The next morning, we met Elaine at the company office. The once bustling marketing firm was eerily quiet, with empty desks and darkened conference rooms. Only a handful of loyal employees remained, working with grim determination. Elaine had collected bank statements, transferred funds reports, and emails from Mark to the company accountant authorizing the suspicious transfers. He claimed these were investments in new market research, Elaine explained, pointing to a series of transactions. But the company he transferred the money to, Horizon Ventures, doesn't actually do any research. It's just a bank account that he and his girlfriend opened 6 months ago. 6 months? Carol looked stunned. That's when we went to Cancun for our anniversary. He was on his phone the whole time, said he was handling a work emergency. He was handling something all right, Elaine said dryly. As we pored over the evidence, I noticed a pattern. These transfers all happened on the same day each month, the 15th, and they're all the same amount, $12,750. Carol frowned. Why that specific amount? It's just under the threshold that would require my signature as co-owner, she realized. He knew exactly what he was doing. As we dug deeper, a more complete picture emerged. Mark had been systematically draining the company while positioning himself to leave. He'd even taken out additional mortgages on the house without Carol's knowledge, forging her signature on the documents. But that's illegal, I said, staring at the mortgage paperwork Elaine had obtained from a friend at the bank. Very, Elaine agreed. And it's exactly what we need to stop him. Carol sat quietly throughout this discussion, absently twisting a pen between her fingers. I recognized that look, the same one she'd had as a child when overwhelmed by a problem too big to solve. Carol? I prompted gently. What are you thinking? She looked up, her eyes hollow. I'm thinking about how blind I've been. I trusted Mark with everything, my heart, my business, my future. And the whole time, he was planning to leave me with nothing. She paused. Just like I was willing to leave you with nothing. The parallel wasn't lost on me, but this wasn't the time to dwell on it. The difference is, I chose to leave and build something new. Mark is trying to destroy what you built. We're not going to let that happen. That afternoon, we took the evidence to a lawyer Elaine knew, a sharp-eyed woman named Vivian who specialized in financial fraud cases. She reviewed the documents with methodical precision, occasionally making notes or asking questions. You have enough here for both criminal charges and a civil suit, she finally announced. The forged mortgage documents alone could put him away for fraud. Add embezzlement from the company, and he's looking at serious consequences. I don't know if I want him in jail, Carol said quietly. I just want what's mine. Vivian smiled thinly. In my experience, the threat of criminal charges makes people very willing to settle civil matters generously. We left with a plan. Vivian would prepare the paperwork for an emergency injunction to freeze Mark's assets, including the shell company's accounts. Meanwhile, Carol would secure the remaining company assets, and Elaine would reach out to former clients to explain the situation and try to rebuild those relationships. As for me, I had my own role to play. That evening, I did something I never would have imagined doing 6 months ago. I called Mark. "Mrs. Harrington?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "Carol said you'd moved away." "I did," I replied calmly. "But I came back when I heard about your separation. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee tomorrow. Just you and me." There was a long pause. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because despite everything, you were my son-in-law for 15 years. I'd like to hear your side of the story." Another pause. "Okay. The coffee shop on Elm at 10 a.m.? Perfect," I said, and hung up. Carol stared at me from across the living room. "What are you doing? Why would you want to talk to him?" "Because someone needs to look him in the eye when he realizes his plan has failed," I said simply. "And I think that someone should be me." Later that night, as Carol finally slept upstairs, her first real sleep in days, I sat on the porch swing Charles had installed years ago. The suburban night was so different from my Seabrook evenings. The mechanical hum of air conditioners replacing the sound of waves, streetlights drowning out stars. I missed my little apartment above the bookshop. I missed Harold's quiet companionship and the children who came for reading hour. But sitting there, planning how to protect my daughter, I felt a different kind of strength forming within me. Not the independence I'd found in Seabrook, but something equally powerful. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "The shop misses you. So do I. Everything okay?" I smiled in the darkness. "Family crisis. Might be a while longer. Keep the reading corner ready for me." His reply came quickly. "For as long as it takes. We're not going anywhere." The word settled warmly in my chest. I had people waiting for me. A life I'd built myself. And that knowledge gave me the courage for what I had to do next. What Mark didn't know as he agreed to meet me was that I had already spoken to his girlfriend that evening. Young, yes, but not nearly as naive as he thought, especially when faced with the prospect of being charged as an accessory to fraud. She had agreed to cooperate completely, turning over text messages, emails, and recorded conversations that would prove devastating to Mark's case. As dawn broke over the neighborhood, I rehearsed what I would say to the man who had tried to destroy my daughter's life. I was no longer just Sadie the bookseller or Sadie the teacher. Today, I would be Sadie the protector, a role I thought I'd left behind, but now embraced with fierce determination. What I didn't anticipate was that Mark would arrive at our meeting with a shocking revelation of his own, one that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my daughter's marriage. The coffee shop on Elm Street had been our family's Sunday morning ritual for years. Charles would read the newspaper while Carol and Mark talked business, and I'd quietly observe, content to be in the background. Now I sat alone at a corner table, watching the door, a manila folder placed neatly beside my untouched latte. Mark arrived 15 minutes late, his usual confident stride now hesitant. He'd lost weight, and his designer shirt hung loosely from his shoulders. Despite everything, a small part of me still saw the charming young man who had once asked Charles for permission to marry Carol. "Sadie," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "You're looking well." "Thank you," I replied calmly. "I found that independence suits me." He ordered a black coffee, his eyes never leaving the folder on the table. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I took a slow sip of my latte. "I think you know, Mark. Horizon Ventures, the second mortgage, the missing company funds." His face paled slightly, but he maintained composure. "Carol's been filling your head with accusations, I see." "No," I said. "The bank statements, transfer records, and forged documents did that." I tapped the folder. "It's all here, including your girlfriend's signed statement." At that, his practiced facade cracked. "Jessica talked to you?" "She did. She's young, Mark. She didn't sign up to be an accessory to financial fraud." He leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. a hollow, bitter sound. You know what's ironic? I never wanted any of this. The business, the big house, the constant pressure to climb higher. That was all Carol. I felt a flare of anger. So you decided to steal from her instead of having an honest conversation. Honest? He leaned forward. Let me tell you about honest, Sadie. Did Carol ever tell you what happened 3 years ago when I wanted to leave the business and teach architecture at the community college? She threatened to divorce me and take everything. This caught me off guard. Carol had never mentioned any such conversation. Or how about when I suggested we scale back, spend more time together? She said I was holding her back. His voice was low, intense. I loved your daughter, Sadie. But she turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone obsessed with success at any cost. That doesn't justify what you did, I said firmly, though doubt had begun to creep in. No, it doesn't, he agreed, surprising me again. What I did was wrong. I'm not denying that. But it wasn't just greed. It was survival. He took a deep breath. When I met Jessica, it wasn't about her youth or looks. She listened to me, respected my dreams. For the first time in years, someone saw me as more than just Carol's husband or the company CFO. I sat quietly, processing his words. They weren't what I'd expected, and they complicated the neat narrative of villain and victim I'd constructed. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Because you deserve the whole truth. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive, placing it on the table. This contains all the financial records, every transfer, every account number, everything Jessica and I did. It also has recordings of conversations with Carol from the past 2 years. I stared at the small device. Why would you give me this? Because I'm tired of the deception, on both sides. He stood up, looking suddenly exhausted. Tell Carol I'll return every penny. The money's still there. We haven't spent it. But in exchange, I want a clean break. No criminal charges, no drawn-out legal battle. As he turned to leave, he paused. And Sadie? Those recordings, they might change how you see your daughter. Just remember that people do desperate things when they feel trapped. I sat alone for a long time after he left, the flash drive heavy in my palm. What was on those recordings that Mark thought would change my perception of Carol? Part of me didn't want to know, wanted to maintain the simple narrative of Carol as victim, Mark as villain. But I'd spent too many years avoiding difficult truths. Back at Carol's house, I found her and Elaine huddled over laptops at the dining table, working on a recovery plan for the business. How did it go? Carol asked anxiously when I walked in. I placed the flash drive on the table. He's offering to return the money in exchange for not pressing charges. He's what? Elaine picked up the drive. Why would he do that? He says he wants a clean break. I hesitated, then added, he also mentioned that there are recordings on that drive. Conversations with you, Carol. Carol's face went very still. What kind of recordings? I don't know. He said they might change how I see you. Elaine looked between us, sensing the tension. I should go. Call me after you've looked at what's on the drive. After she left, Carol and I sat in silence, the flash drive between us like a live grenade. What's on the recordings, Carol? I finally asked. She shook her head. I don't know specifically. We had a lot of arguments over the past few years. He said you threatened to divorce him when he wanted to teach architecture. Her eyes widened slightly. That was different. The business was just taking off. We couldn't afford for him to take a massive pay cut to pursue some midlife crisis dream. Was it his dream or a midlife crisis? What does it matter now? She snapped. He stole from me. He cheated on me. Why are you suddenly taking his side? I'm not taking sides, I said calmly. I'm trying to understand the whole picture. Carol stood abruptly. There's nothing to understand. He's manipulating you, just like he always manipulated me. She stormed upstairs, leaving me alone with the flash drive and growing doubts. That night, after Carol went to bed, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The financial records were exactly as Mark had described. Detailed documentation of the transfers, account numbers, and balances. The money was indeed still there, moved but not spent. Then I found the audio files, dated and labeled. With a deep breath, I clicked on the oldest one. Carol's voice filled my headphones, cold and cutting in a way I'd never heard before. "If you leave this company, Mark, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. Nothing. Is that what you want? To throw away everything we've built because you're suddenly not fulfilled? Grow up." Mark's response was quiet, defeated. "I don't recognize you anymore, Carol. When did money become more important than happiness?" "When I realized happiness doesn't pay the bills," she shot back. "My mother spent her whole life depending on my father, having no identity of her own. I won't live like that. I won't be weak like her." I flinched as if slapped. Is that how Carol saw me? As weak? As nothing more than Charles's shadow? I listened to file after file, each revealing a side of my daughter I'd never seen. Calculating, ruthless, obsessed with success at any cost. In the most recent recording, from just weeks before Mark left, Carol coldly discussed leveraging a client's marital problems to secure their business. "Everyone has a weak spot," she told Mark. "Find it and press on it until they give you what you want." By the time I closed the laptop, dawn was breaking. I felt hollowed out, unsure of everything I thought I knew. The black and white story of victim and villain had dissolved into shades of gray. Carol wasn't the innocent I'd believed. And Mark, while still wrong in his actions, wasn't the heartless predator I'd painted him to be. But most disturbing was seeing the reflection of myself in both of them. Carol's fear of dependency mirroring my own. Mark's desperate bid for freedom echoing my escape to Seabrook. As I watched the sun rise over the suburban rooftops, I realized that the real confrontation wasn't with Mark. It was the one waiting upstairs, with a daughter who had built her identity on rejecting everything she feared in me. And she had no idea that I now knew the truth she'd hidden for years. Not just from me, but perhaps from herself as well. What Carol couldn't possibly know was that these revelations would lead to the most painful conversation of our lives. One that would either break our relationship beyond repair or forge it into something new and unbreakably strong. I made coffee and waited. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old pipes, sounds I used to find comforting, but now seemed to whisper secrets. When Carol finally came downstairs, her eyes were puffy and red. She'd been crying. "I heard you listening to the recordings last night," she said, standing in the doorway. "I couldn't sleep, so I sat outside your door." I pushed a mug of coffee toward her. "You should have come in. I was afraid of what I'd see in your eyes." She sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the mug. "Now I know. What do you think you know, Carol? That you're disappointed in me. That you think I'm a monster." Her voice cracked. "That you're going to leave again." I took a deep breath. "I'm not going to leave. But we need to talk. Really talk about what I heard." For the next hour, we did something we hadn't done in years. We listened to each other. Carol explained how she'd watched me defer to Charles on every decision, how she'd vowed never to lose herself in a relationship the way she thought I had. She described the panic she felt at the idea of being financially dependent on anyone else. When Mark wanted to teach, all I could think was that he'd become unreliable, that I'd end up supporting us both, that eventually he'd resent me for it. Her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I was terrified of ending up like me," I finished quietly. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Carol," I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand, "the woman you were afraid of becoming, that meek, dependent shadow of a person, that was never really me. That was who I thought I had to be to keep the peace with your father." Carol looked up, confusion in her eyes. "Your father was a good man in many ways," I continued, "but he needed control, needed to be the decision maker. Early in our marriage, I learned that challenging him led to arguments, to tension. So I adapted. I became what he needed me to be." "But you loved him," Carol said. "I saw how devastated you were when he died." "I did love him, and I was devastated. But do you know what else I felt, deep down, that I couldn't admit even to myself?" I paused, the truth still difficult to speak aloud. Relief. Relief that for the first time in 45 years, I could make my own choices without justifying them to anyone. Carol sat back, stunned. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because it felt like a betrayal. Because I was ashamed of feeling that way. Because I didn't know who I was without him. I squeezed her hand. But Carol, that's what Seabrook gave me. The chance to find out. She wiped away tears. And who are you? I smiled. I'm a woman who loves books and children and sunsets over water, who enjoys my own company but also treasures deep connections, who can be strong and soft at the same time. I paused. I'm your mother, but I'm also Sadie. Finally, just Sadie. I wanted to be strong, Carol whispered. I thought that meant never needing anyone, never showing weakness. That's not strength, I said gently. It's armor. And armor might protect you, but it also weighs you down, isolates you. We talked about Mark then, about how Carol's drive for success had slowly suffocated their relationship, and how his response, while wrong, came from a place of desperation. We talked about her business tactics, the ruthless strategies she'd employed in pursuit of success. I became someone I didn't recognize, she admitted. Someone I didn't even like, but I didn't know how to stop. You stop by making different choices, I said simply. Starting now. That afternoon, Carol called Vivian the lawyer and explained that she wanted to negotiate a settlement with Mark rather than press charges. Then she called Mark himself. A difficult, raw conversation that I witnessed only one side of, but that ended with Carol in tears and a tentative agreement to meet with mediators. Later, she gathered her remaining employees and confessed to the toxic culture she'd created. Some looked shocked, others nodded in validation of what they'd experienced. She promised changes but acknowledged that words meant nothing without actions. She offered those who wanted to leave generous severance packages, and to those who stayed, a restructured company with profit sharing and better work-life balance. I don't know if I can save the business, she told me that evening as we sat on the porch swing. But I'm starting to think that maybe that's not the most important thing to save. A week later, the first mediation session with Mark took place. The financial issues were relatively straightforward. All the money would be returned, the business debts paid, the forged mortgage documents addressed with the bank. The emotional terrain was far more complex, with years of resentment and hurt on both sides. But as I watched my daughter across the conference table, composed, honest, taking responsibility for her part in the collapse of her marriage, I felt a surge of pride. This was the real Carol, the one who had been buried under ambition and fear for too long. As spring turned to summer, Carol's transformation continued. The business downsized to a sustainable level, focusing on clients whose values aligned with the new company ethos. She sold the too-large house and moved into a small cottage with a garden. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping residents build financial independence. Mark and his girlfriend moved to Portland, where he finally pursued his dream of teaching architecture. The divorce was finalized without acrimony, a clean break that left both of them free to build new lives. And I went back to Seabrook. You could stay, Carol offered the night before my departure. We were sitting in her new garden, fireflies blinking around us in the twilight. We're just getting to know each other again. I smiled. We don't need to live in the same place to know each other. Besides, there's a bookshop waiting for me, and a reading corner full of children, and a man who texts me every day to ask when I'm coming home. Carol raised an eyebrow. Harold? Yes. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. He's kind and thoughtful, and sees me exactly as I am. Are you in love with him? She asked softly. I don't know yet, I answered honestly, but I'm open to the possibility. That's something else Seabrook gave me, the courage to be open again. The next morning, Carol drove me to the bus station. As we said goodbye, she pressed something into my hand, the old teacup with my wedding ring still inside. I think you should have this back, she said. Not because I want you to wear it, but because it's part of your story. All of it. The good years with Dad, the hard ones, the constraints you accepted, the freedom you found. It's all worth remembering. I held the teacup carefully, running my finger around its delicate rim. Thank you. Not just for this, but for doing the hard work these past months. I'm proud of you, Carol. I learned from the best, she said, hugging me tightly. Even when I thought I wanted nothing to do with your example, I was watching. And in the end, It was your courage to start over that showed me I could change too. As the bus pulled away, I watched my daughter standing tall in the morning sunlight, a woman finding her own balance just as I had found mine. Back in Seabrook, Harold was waiting at the station, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw me. Behind him stood a small group of children from my reading hour, holding hand-drawn welcome home signs. "There she is," Harold said, taking my suitcase. "Told you she'd come back." "Of course I came back," I replied, linking my arm through his. "This is where I belong." That evening, as we closed the bookshop together, Harold asked about Carol. "She's finding her way," I said. "Just like I am." "And are you happy with the way you found?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I thought about the teacup safely tucked away in my apartment upstairs, about the daughter who had hurt me and then healed alongside me, about the husband I had loved despite the constraints, and about the woman I had become in this small coastal town. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later, as I stood on my balcony watching the moonlight shimmer across the harbor, my phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "Started a mother-daughter book club at the shelter today. Thought of you with every page we turned." I smiled, typing back, "Save me a seat. I'll be there for the next chapter." And I knew, with the certainty that comes from finally standing firmly in your own truth, that our story, Carol's and mine, was just beginning.